let me, I think it might be better for me to start to say something before we get into questions. First of all, do you all speak English well enough to understand what I'm saying? Is that, okay, so that would be a good start. So I'm the president of St. George's University, but I've only been president for 3 years. You should probably know something about my background because some of the things I may say relate more than just to our university. So prior to becoming the president of St. George's, I was the founding dean of a new medical school that I built at the University of California, Riverside. That's the 6th medical school in the University of California system. You may know that system. It has UCSF, UCLA, UC San Diego, and now UC Riverside. Prior to doing that, I was the chairman of the Department of Medicine at 2 different medical schools for 20 years. One was the Medical College of Wisconsin, that's in Milwaukee, and the other was Case Western Reserve University, that's in Cleveland, Ohio. Prior to that, I was on the faculty of Brown University in Rhode Island. Prior to that, I was on the faculty at Harvard. I'm a tropical disease specialist by training, and so in contrast to most U.S. trained doctors, I've actually spent a great deal of time in other countries, specifically in this area, principally in the Philippines and China. I spent over 35 years in those 2 countries. So I have a fair familiarity with other countries, and I also trained, in addition to training in the United States, I also trained in England. So I trained at the Mass General in Boston and University Hospitals in Cleveland, and I trained at the London School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. So I know a bit about both the English and the U.S. system, and I know about international schools, and I also know a lot about U.S. med schools. I should start by saying that a great deal of Korean students go to the United States to go to college to get a bachelor's degree, but unfortunately they're often not told that despite getting a 4-year education in the United States and wanting to be a doctor, meaning they're pre-med, they have virtually no chance of getting into a U.S. medical school. So the first thing to point out is that U.S. medical schools do not in general take foreign nationals. In fact, last year, all 150 U.S. medical schools only took roughly 250 foreign nationals, and St. George's University took over 400. So we take more international students at our medical school than all the U.S. medical schools combined. So that's important if you want to be a practicing physician in the United States, or for that matter in England. If you're a foreign national, you will find it very difficult to get into either English medical schools or U.S. medical schools. Now, there are other international schools besides ourselves. We're the original, if you will, Caribbean school. We were started in 1976. We're 41 years of age. And we are currently the largest supplier of physicians to the United States of any university in the world. So we just placed 946 of our graduates into ACGME accredited residencies in the United States. So if you want to be a practicing physician in the United States and you're a Korean citizen, in my estimation, we're probably the absolute best pathway to accomplish that goal, and that's based on statistics. Now, there's a couple things that you should know about statistics. There's no 100% in this world, but St. George's probably invests more in student success than any med school I've ever worked at. Most medical schools, you have one curriculum, you get put into one big class, and if you struggle, you get one chance to repeat it, and if you don't make it, you're out. We actually invest very heavily in helping all of our students succeed. That's very unusual. That doesn't normally happen in med schools. I think that's particularly important if you're a foreign national and you're trying to enter a very competitive medical environment. We have a lot of programs to make sure that you're successful. For example, we have 42 PhDs that are in various fields like educational psychology. They do not teach medicine. All they do is support our students. They run study groups, small groups, time management, English as a second language, they do individual counseling. That's how we basically take students and that would not normally get into a U.S. medical school, even U.S. citizens, and we perform at roughly the same level as U.S. medical schools. All medical students in the United States have to take 3 standardized tests. Those are USMLE 1 and CK and CS, and then ultimately the USMLE 3. We have about a 97% pass rate on first attempt. That's actually slightly higher than the US medical school average. So our students do very well on those standardized tests. Probably more important, but people don't talk about it, is the attrition rate of the schools. There are other Caribbean schools that have similar step 1 pass rates, and quote, I'll tell you our match rates in the US programs, but what they don't tell you is that they flunk out half the students that they accept. And what they do is they test them right before the USMLE step 1, and if they don't think you can pass it, they flunk you out. We don't do that. We have an attrition rate under 10%. So we are committed to the success of our students, and that really differentiates us from most other schools. Then finally, for those, and we take students, 70% of our students come from the United States, but 30% come from about 140 countries. So we have many international students there. Not all of them want to be doctors in the United States, but the ones that do want to be doctors in the United States, and they pass all of their step exams to qualify. This last year, 94% of the US citizens got residency training programs. And probably more important to you, because you're not US citizens, 84% of our international grads got residencies. Now, that may say, well, what happens to the 16%? Well, 2 things you should know. The actual success rate of most other international schools is down in the 20 and 30% range. So we're considerably higher if you're an international grad. And the other thing is that commitment to make sure you're successful continues even if you don't match. So we run 17 programs for our students that don't match, and we have a 65% match rate on second attempt. So even if you're not successful in your first attempt, we continue to help you basically increase your chances of getting into those programs. In addition to that US match, we have just recently developed a partnership with the National Health Service in England. As you may know, England has the same physician shortage problem that, by the way, you have in Korea and we have in the United States. And their problem is about to get a lot worse because they're going to exit the European Common Market. And so historically, they have filled those positions, doctor positions that they couldn't fill with English-trained doctors, with doctors from Bulgaria and Poland and Eastern Europe, and they will no longer be able to do that when they exit the common market. And so they've begun to look to the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth are a group of 42 countries that used to be British colonies. And we now have a pathway for our students into the British residency training program. So we just developed that this year. They've already now taken 26 of our students that didn't match in the US system. They've taken it into the British system. And they have 2 entries. I think we'll have a little under 100 students into the British residency training program by the end of this year. So we have a good track record of training doctors that practice in the United States, but we now are developing another option for our graduates to become physicians in England. The advantage of becoming an English-trained physician is, unlike the United States, England has reciprocity with many other former English colonies. So if you are qualified as a doctor in England, you can actually sit for the exams in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Singapore, Hong Kong, and India. So that actually, English training has a lot more flexibility in where you can practice, whereas unfortunately in the United States, but that medical license in the United States can't be moved to practice in other countries easily because we don't give reciprocity to any other country. So that's sort of a background of our university. I thought it'd be useful just to tell you a little about me and about our university. And so maybe this would be now a good time to try to answer questions. Would that be reasonable? Was this all, did they know all that already? I just repeated everything you said?
No. Okay, so basically I'm planning to go to Korea as a Korean citizen, but when I get to have a chance to apply to the US residency, I will probably apply to the States with H1 visa. I think that might be my first option, unless I get the Korean the license from Korea. Unless I get the J1 through the Korean license. So how do you think that I could be better prepared for the applying for the U.S. residency in terms of in terms of studying step 1 and the research and extracurricular activities, and how school can support students with those preparations, especially for the non-U.S. citizens?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, we actually provide a lot of information and advice in help preparing you. So for instance, at the end of your 3rd year of medical school, we've developed an electronic algorithm which is based on the success of our medical students and on information that we received about hospitals that take visas, both J visas and sponsor H1 visas. And we've entered into that algorithm hospital systems that have taken other international graduates into those residency programs. And so actually you can now say, I'm interested in going into internal medicine in the Northeast of the United States, and we know what your STEP scores are because we know you, and we know basically your grade point and other things. And we can generate a list of 50 programs that we would recommend that you apply to because they have either taken an SGU student that has a similar academic background to you in the past, or they have taken a international graduate in the past, and they would all be programs that are known to have sponsored H1 or J visas in the past. What that does is it allows you to focus on a smaller number of programs than if you had to do this on your own. In addition, it tells you more information than you can obtain online. So it's possible for you to look at a residency program and they say, oh yes, we sponsor H1 visas. But in truth, in the last 5 years, they've never sponsored a single visa. So that's probably not a good bet because you could spend a lot of time and energy trying to get into that program, and it's probably not going to work. That's also very useful to you to know that information because let me outline what medical school looks like. The first 2 years are basic science years. They're in Grenada. Well, they'll be in Grenada for you. You could be 1 year in England in Newcastle and then your 2nd year in Grenada. But those are basically your basic science years. You then enter the clinical years in the 3rd year. And in the 3rd year, you will typically go to one geographic location and you'll do all your core rotations in one geographic location. You don't have to do it that way, but most students do it that way because they don't want to move around a lot in the 3rd year.
Is that going to happen with the affiliated hospitals?
Those are all in our affiliated hospitals. So we have 80 affiliated hospitals in the United States, the United Kingdom, and in Canada. And you will do your core rotations in one of our affiliated hospitals, which will be your medicine, your surgery, your psych, your OB, and your surgery. I think I mentioned them all. Your family medicine you can either do in your 3rd year or you can do it in your 4th year. You have to do family medicine, but you don't have to do it in your 3rd year. Then typically in the 4th year, you will go around and do elective rotations. And while you're doing that, you will want to position yourself to be auditioning for residency training programs. So that's why we give you this list at the beginning of the 3rd year, because that will help you pick where you might want to do rotations. Because the truth is, a residency training program is far more likely to take you if you spent a month there and they liked you, and the nurses liked you, and the other students liked you, than if you went there and just interviewed. Because an interview is, you talk to somebody for 30 minutes. It's hard to know what kind of a doctor you would be. Now, I'm sure all of you will be very grade conscious. I've trained medical students my whole life, and it is important to get good grades. If you do really well on standardized tests, that's better than doing really poorly. Having said that, I've never heard of a patient in my entire life that says the most important quality of my doctor is they got an A+ in organic chemistry. I've never heard that. So they really want to know that you are the right kind of person to be a doctor, and that's very hard to tell from your grades, and it's hard to tell in a short interview. The way to show what kind of a doctor you're going to be is to go to that hospital and work for a month in rotations, and then they know what kind of doctor you're going to be. And so obviously you will greatly increase the chance of you getting into that residency if you know which programs you're competitive for, and you go out of your way to schedule an elective in the 4th year in that program. Now you put yourself in a very strong position to get a residency. So that would be my #1 way of doing it. The other way to do it is there are residencies in the United States that actually go outside the match. This is not well known by people, but you're either all in the match or all out of the match. And so some hospitals intentionally go outside the match, and those hospitals will offer you a position in their hospital while you're still a 4th-year medical student, well before the match, and you either accept it or don't accept it. And so that's another pathway into residency. And then, if you don't match, there's a whole process of getting into residency training programs between the end of the match and July 1st. This has been going on now. So we actually matched, I think, 902 positions. But we've added 44 additional residents into it between the end of the match and July 1st because we network with programs. So for instance, a program may take an international graduate and there's a problem with their visa. So then they can't take the position. So we slide in one of our students. And so because we work in this area, so you really don't know if you have a residency until almost July 1st. So those are all things that we do to increase the chance of doing it. Probably the most important thing is that St. George's University has an excellent reputation in the United States. Now, of course, you think I'm biased. Heck, I'm the president of the university. But when I was the chairman of medicine in Cleveland and in Milwaukee, I trained quite a few SGU graduates. In fact, I had 3 St. George's chief residents. So, obviously they were the best residents I had. So I always thought very highly of St. George graduates, and so, not surprisingly, I took 1 or 2 St. George graduates every year. I never took any Ross graduates. I didn't even know the names of other international schools, but we had a really good reputation. So the reputation of the institution is important because they know that we have quality graduates. And so going to a place that's taken other SGU students is useful. And there are a lot of them. 1% of all the practicing doctors in the United States are SGU alums. It's a huge number. We have almost 17,000 practicing alumni in the United States. It's a huge number.
Very proud of it.
Well, we're very proud of it, but it's because we've been turning out good doctors for 41 years. So, that was a long answer, but that's the answer.
Thank you.
Just one question, because I'm quite interested in applying the US Army but I'm just wondering whether if there any chance for me to apply for the US residency training in the US Army,
the U.S. Army in general, I know this from my days in the U.S. medical schools, you have to be accepted into their program. Now, if they will accept you into their program, then yes, then you will have an inside track into the military residency training programs. But you have to be in their program in medical school. So you have to do it at the front end, not the back end. So the deal in the military, if they accept you, is that they actually pay for your 4 years of medical school, and then you owe them 6 years of service after you get out. And you need to apply to a U.S. military residency. Now, they let a small number of graduates that go through medical school apply for residencies not in the military, usually in high-end specialties like plastic surgery or ENT or something else. But the vast majority of physicians that train through the U.S. military system will train in the 6 military hospitals that have residency training programs. But you have to get into it before you start medical school.
Alright. So that means there won't be any chance for me to apply for that from other medical schools?
Well, you know, the U.S. Army in general is taking principally U.S. citizens, not exclusively. So, you know, I honestly don't know if the U.S. Army takes foreign. Are you a green card holder or a U.S. citizen?
No.
So you'd have to ask them whether they would accept you, but I don't know if they take non-U.S. citizens. I can tell you there's a lot of U.S. citizens that try to take that pathway,
Yeah.
because medical school is really expensive, and they get medical school for free, and they only have to pay 6 years of working as a physician. And by the way, you get the military retirement for all 4 years of medical school, all 3 years of your residency, and the 6 years of your commitment. So by the time you finish your commitment, you almost have 20 years into the military, and you retire at half pay. So the military is a pretty good deal. So there's a lot of American citizens that want those spots. So I would check with the U.S. military, but I'm not sure if they will take foreign nationals or not.
Yes, but as far as what I've heard is that there is a system called MAPNI system, but as the foreigners, if I serve the U.S. military for about 2 years, then they said they might offer the citizenship.
There's a pathway to citizenship based on service in the military, but that service in the military won't be as a physician.
Not physician.
No, it's not as a physician. Yeah, you would end up being a soldier. Now, if you want to be a soldier, that is a way to get U.S. citizenship. I know that pathway. There's a lot of people that take that pathway, but they're not taking that pathway as doctors. So you'd have to do that, get your U.S. citizenship, and then apply to be in the U.S. military, and then you could probably do that scholarship. You'd have to probably spend a minimum of 2 years in the military to do that. Although I think for the citizenship it may be 4-year commitment. I don't know. As I recall, it's more than 2 years.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
민경 씨 오셨어요? 민경 씨. She's a MCPH.
Yeah, I'm currently attending MCPH's university that is in Boston. And my question is that I just finished my first year in Boston, and right now I reserved the seat at Saint-George Medical School for 2020. And right now my professors told me that at least you need to take the MCAT and apply to other medical school in the United States. But the problem is that if I apply other medical school in the United States, I need to give up the seat for 2020 at St. George Medical School. So I just don't know how I need to handle that. Do you have any advice that you can give me, whether I need to study in Boston 1 more years or just go to Granada right away after I finish 3 years at MCPHS University?
Well, this is an awkward question to answer because I don't want to say something negative about the people giving you advice.
I know.
But let me just restate the statistics. There are over 150 medical schools in the United States, and they took less than 250 students last year that were foreign nationals. That means that the average medical school in the United States takes less than 1% of their students that are international grads. So it is not impossible to do what you said, but it is extremely unlikely, extremely unlikely. So I'm not sure that they're doing you a favor. Now, let me also say that if your advisor is a faculty member in your own university, don't you think that they have a bias to have you stay in their own university? And by suggesting that you get into a U.S. medical school, you will end up paying tuition for 4 years at that school, only to discover at the end of 4 years that you're not going to get into U.S. medical school. So, now, I don't know exactly how much tuition you're paying, but the average foreign national that goes to a reasonably good undergraduate university in the United States will pay $250,000 for that bachelor's degree. That's a sizable amount of money. Now, I would argue, if you already know that you want to be a physician, that it is much more cost effective to enter a 6 or a 5-year pathway with St. George's University, where you know at the end of the day, as long as you do well, you'll get an MD degree. And the cost of that, yes, will be more than the $250,000 that you just spent for your bachelor's degree, but you will pay for about 3/4 of the cost of becoming an MD. So, in my opinion, it is not very economically sound, and it is not very statistically sound to follow the pathway of spending $250,000 to get a bachelor's degree in the United States, only to discover that you're not going to get into a U.S. medical school, and then apply to St. George's. And we'd undoubtedly take you. We take a lot of students that have had a bachelor's degree, but if you have an opportunity to go to St. George's and cut down on the amount of time that it takes to get an MD and pay less tuition to get there, at the end of the day, medicine is a competency-based profession. Whether it takes you 5 years to get there, or 8 years to get there, or 10 years to get there, you still have to ultimately get there. And so, if you can get there in a shorter period of time, I would do that. Because ultimately, most of your medical training is actually not in medical school. Most of your medical training is doing your residency and post-medical school training. So, I think it would be more economically beneficial for you. And statistically, you have a far greater likelihood of being a practicing physician in the United States by going to St. George's than to follow the pathway that was recommended to you. But I understand that's a little awkward for me to say that. But I can say that having been the dean of a U.S. med school, it's not like, I live in St. George's. I've been on the other side. My medical school in California, not only did we never take a foreign national, we wouldn't even interview students from out of the state of California. So, U.S. medical schools, it is very, very difficult to get into a U.S. medical school as a foreign national. Not impossible. It's very, very difficult.
Thank you.
필수 씨 오셨어요? 필수 씨.
네, 왔어요.
예. Briefly introduction 하시고.
I'm Phil. I graduated from Franklin Marshall College in Pennsylvania.
I know it.
Yeah, I was a biology major, and now I'm applying to SGU to start my new adventure, I guess.
Yeah. Well, your next 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just waiting for interview.
So what's the question?
Um,
I mean, there are many people that do exactly what you did because they basically went to 4 years of college, were pre-med. Have you applied to a U.S. medical school?
no.
Well, you can, but I think you'll discover that if you're going to do that, you should be applied to us at the same time because the odds are you're not going to make it into U.S. medical school. But that's much the argument that I made. You're a biology major. One thing I'd say about that really for the other students, you don't have to be a science major, by the way, to go to medical school. You just have to take the 12 classes that are required for pre-med. In fact, statistically speaking, non-science majors actually do better than science majors as long as they do well in their 12 required science classes. And I think it's because it's a more well-rounded student. So hopefully, in addition to your biology major, you took all those sociology and anthropology and other classes, because if there's any advantage to doing a liberal arts education, it's to get a broader education than just in the sciences. Because ultimately, to be an effective doctor, you have to both understand the science, but you have to learn the art of being a physician too. And so that's an important thing. It's also, I'll tell you, you're 2 years older than many of the students because you went that pathway. And that ultimately helps you because you're a bit more mature, you're farther down in your career. And I think in general, students that do just what you're doing, 4 years and 4 years, have an easier time than those that take the shorter pathway. It's a little hard because you're doing it in a short period of time.
필수 씨 뭐 궁금한 거 없어요?
더 생각해.
His dad, right next to him, he's a ENT, fully licensed Korean doctor.
Great.
He's been attending for like 10 seminars. Oh my gosh. 10번 오셨어요, 아버님. 그 다음에 우영 씨.
네.
네.
Hi.
He applied also.
Okay, so I am currently a student at NYU, majoring in finance, right?
Yeah, no, our headquarters is in
Yeah.
Manhattan. I know
Yeah.
exactly where you are.
And this may sound a little weird, but I've received some sort of calling that I have to be a doctor. and that was no easy decision. Like, I thought about it for a long time, and during the time that I served in the army, in the Korean army, that is, I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I finally decided that this is the path for me, right? And so my question is, are there many students like myself who have previously majored in other sort of majors like finance or econ or something like that? And if so, what is the acceptance rate of those students?
Fair enough. Well, first of all, you're not in that, that's not that unusual situation. Some people know they want to be doctors when they're in high school. Some of them know they want to be doctors since they were 5 years old. So, you know, that's a little easier if that's what they always wanted to do. But there are many people that didn't figure out what they wanted to be until later in life. And actually, that life experience often makes them much more successful physicians. And I'll tell you my own case. I graduated from college, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. I applied to 7 med schools, 5 law schools, 3 PhD programs in 2 different disciplines, and I had an acting job in San Francisco, which I always wondered if I'd taken that job. And I almost didn't make it into med school because I was a psych major, and I did not have all the pre-med requirements. And of those 7 med schools, 6 of them said you're not qualified, don't bother to apply. And one of them was Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio, which was a innovative medical school at the time. And they had a funny admissions process. You talked to one person, a guy named Jack Coy, and you interviewed with him, and he picked you in the interview. And I interviewed with him. He said, "Man, you make a really interesting doctor. I'll give you a place in this medical school." And that's why I'm a physician today. So there's a lot of people that have unusual backgrounds. Particularly have a lot of students that have had other life and career experiences. We just graduated a student that's 50 years old. A medical school student that's 50 years old. And was in astronaut training and before they decided that they wanted to be a physician. She's in an OBGYN residency now at UCLA. So no, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I will tell you that people that are in non-science fields and have had significant life experiences bring that to the medical profession. And so I would look at that as that you have an advantage over many of the younger students because you're older, you've had a little bit more maturity. Now, having said that, it's sometimes more of a challenge because not most, but a lot of your peer group will be much younger than you.
Right.
And, you know, many of them will say, "I've always wanted to be a doctor." Okay, well, that's not a bad thing. But I will say among those people that, quote, always wanted to be a doctor, there is a group that are going to end up very unhappy. And those are the sons and daughters of physicians, sorry, back in the room, who have been told their whole life that they have to be a doctor. And they go to medical school and they end up not liking it. And I do feel badly for that. You need to want to be a doctor. It's hard work. It is hard work. It's you know, you don't work 40 hours a week. Being a doctor is a calling. It is. And so you have to really want to do it. I mean, you have to really love doing it because you end up doing it for a lot of hours and for a lot of years. So I actually think you're in a much safer position having been older and coming to that conclusion than some younger students, especially, let's say, an 18-year-old that decides they want to be a doctor. I think that's chancier because, you know, by the time they're 22, 23, maybe they say they don't really like doing this. So, no, not at all. And in fact, I'll tell you an experiment. Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, you probably know that medical school.
I think I've heard.
For over 20 years, they have taken 20 students that have done no science at all, none. And they give them a 3-month basic science boot camp, and they put them right in their med school. And those students at graduation are indistinguishable from the other students. So, you know, it's not that tough. The big thing about medical school is don't fall behind and keep working all the time. It's not the kind of place where you can fool around for a month or so and then catch up. That's not the way it works. It is difficult, but it's not difficult if you stay at it. And I think I can take any reasonably intelligent person and make them into a great doctor. What I'm not good at doing is taking mediocre people and making them better people. So personally, I'd rather recruit people who have the right personal qualities to be doctors and figure out how to teach them to be doctors, rather than take people that, you know, take easy ways and, you know, are not that committed and, you know, or want to do something else. They make terrible doctors. And I don't care how smart they are, I prefer not having them in my school.
더 물어볼 거세요? 혜경 씨 오셨어요?
Yes. So,
Well, sir, I graduated university in Korea, majoring in chemistry, and I had a career working in pharmaceutical companies. And I I just wanted to ask, what I know that there is in the clinical year, the St. George students practice in the United States.
Yep.
They have a chance to do that. And do we get offer for the student visa or like a travel visa? I was wondering about.
All right, well, first let me say something about, because you brought up the clinical years and the fact we do clinical rotations. You can go to medical school in Korea and probably get a terrific medical education. You're probably every bit as good a doctor as the graduates at St. George's. But if you want to practice, if you want to train in the United States, the big advantage that St. George's has over an outstanding Korean medical school is the US-based experience. But it's more than just US-based experience. If you went and did rotations in a small community hospital, that would be a different experience than the experience that our students have. All of our students do all their rotations only in hospitals and clinics that have ACGME accredited residency training programs in the same discipline. So this is a much smaller subset of hospitals than just training in the United States. And I say that because some foreign nationals, pay money to get, quote, clinical experience in the United States, but they're not getting the same experience that you get. If you do your medicine rotation or your pediatric rotation, you're going to be doing it in the setting of a residency program in that field. So that is already a teaching hospital, not just a hospital. The additional advantage is most of, not 100%, but almost all of our programs not only teach our students, but they teach US medical students. And that allows your faculty member you're attending to say, this student is as good as the top quarter of NYU students. That's a big advantage because it takes your performance and says, oh yeah, this is a really good medical student, but it actually directly compares you to the US students, which are largely what those residencies are taking. So that's a huge advantage of our program. So it's not just that they get clinical experience, I mean, everybody realizes that, but it's in a teaching hospital, and it's in a teaching hospital that also teaches US students. That's a huge advantage, and that's why our students match at such a high rate, because those are the places that they go. Now, having said that, when you're talking about your clinical rotations and your visas, there really is no problem as a student doing this. We handle the because as a visiting medical student, you're coming in under a student visa. So that's really not, you may, if you, for instance, go to England for part of your training, you have to maybe renew your visa, every 6 months or something. But you are basically, in general, unless you come from one of the, I think it's 6 countries that our president, who will remain nameless, has decided not to allow students from those countries to enter under any circumstances. And fortunately, we don't have a lot of students. We had 11 students in our school that fell in that category, and we sent them all to England because they don't have that problem in England. But in general, that's not the problem. Now, having said that, the visa issue is really not so much as a medical student. The visa issue comes up when you go for your residency. And so you have to look for hospitals that will sponsor an H visa or a J visa or some, because the visa issue is really more of an issue around the residency. It's really not much of an issue as a medical student, as long as you come from Korea, because we know we don't have a problem in Korea.
혜진 씨.
My name is Janice. I went to school in Florida. I studied pre-medicine for 4 years. And I was applying medical schools, but I realized it cost a lot. I mean, I already knew, but it just feel like it's impossible to pay off all those bills if it piles up, So I kind of stopped applying to medical schools and started looking at some PhD degrees. And if I still want to go to medical school after PhD programs, I was thinking maybe I can apply when I have some money that's on my, So financially, I was wondering if you have I know a lot of schools, they provide good financial aids and stuff, but most of them are not quite, not applicable for foreigners. So I was wondering if you know, and I don't know, if I'm not sure.
No, I understand what you're saying. So, I think you'll find I'm a pretty straightforward person.
Yeah.
Medical school in the United States is expensive. It is very expensive. It is far more expensive than medical school in Korea in general. So it is expensive. Now, our medical school is actually no more expensive than private medical schools like Tufts or Georgetown's, but it is real expensive. It is, as any of you have applied, you realize it's a lot of money. We do have scholarships, but still, even with scholarships, it's still a lot of money. So, you have to figure if, you want to finance your education to do that, that is a lot of money that you'll end up borrowing. And if you're not a U.S. citizen, you're not going to be able to borrow it from the U.S. government. Now, all of the U.S. citizens who are at our school, we qualify for Title IV loans from the U.S. federal government. And so you'll discover that almost all of the Americans that are at the school borrow all their education, and they pay it back after they become a physician. So you will have to borrow from a private source to go to medical school. So you were suggesting, well, I'll go and get a PhD. Well, the advantage of getting a PhD is that will be less money, and in general, even as an international student, you will get not only scholarships, but you'll get paid to do teaching and other activities. So the process of getting a PhD is less expensive during the time that you're getting it. Now, having said that, at the end of the day, if you have a PhD, you still have to get a job in order to pay back the money that you had to pay for the reduced tuition to get your PhD. So you still end up having to get a job. And you will find that the PhD job market, depending on what kind of PhD you have, is not a particularly lucrative business, if you will. Now, alternatively, it turns out that if you go to medical school and you're successful in getting a residency in the United States, you will discover that no matter how expensive it may seem, if you can get someone to loan you that money, the repayment is it's quite a good investment from the person loaning you the money, because the starting salary for the lowest paid physician in the United States is about $180,000 a year. And so the typical American student, granted, borrows from the US federal government, but we have less than a 1% loan failure rate. So our students all pay back those loans, because if they become physicians, they will pay it back because they get very well paid. So if your plan was to get a PhD and then get your MD, well, that's a long pathway, but I would point out that at the end of the PhD, you're still not going to make that much money. You'll still have to work for a while to pay off the cost of getting your PhD, and then you're still facing the challenge of borrowing, I don't know, $250,000 to get your MD degree. I think if you want to be a doctor, the first thing, if you don't want to be a physician, then the answer is clear, do something else. But if you want to be a physician and you want to practice in the United States, I would say economically it makes more sense to borrow the money, go to medical school, and then get into a profession that is high paying enough that you can pay it back. The nice thing about the United States is there are no unemployed physicians. So there are unemployed PhDs. In fact, you live in Korea, so you know that there's a lot of unemployed PhDs in Korea. So, having a PhD is not a guarantee that you can get a job. But if you can be a licensed physician in the United States, it's virtually a guarantee that you can get a job. So I understand what you're saying, but economically, it makes more sense to find some way to pay for medical school, do well, and get a residency, and then you're virtually guaranteed to have a high-paying job for the rest of your life, and you can pay back not only your student loans, but you can buy your house and do everything else. It's just smarter economically.
Thank you.
But it is a lot of money. I know it's a lot.
정희 씨,
저 아직 딱히 여쭤볼 게 없어서
그 듣고만 있을 거예요?
딱히 진짜 물어볼 게 없어서 들을 거.
그냥 왔어요? 성경 씨.
Hi, I'm planning to apply for next January course for post-bachelor or
A post-bac program?
yeah, because I would pick I'm majoring in communications and I'm graduating for this winter, so that's my only pathway.
No, it's not your only pathway. That is a pathway, but it's not your only pathway.
Can I also apply for just 4-year med?
Probably not. You probably can't go directly. How much science background have you had?
Like just one class,
And what was that class?
biology.
Okay, so there are several different pathways that you have that you could take. One pathway is the one you suggested, which is to do a post-bac, 1-year post-bac, and then enter the medical school. And that would be a traditional thing to do. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the best pathway, but that is a pathway. Another pathway is that we have, as you may know, a 3-year pre-med pathway so that you can, if you went to high school, you could actually enter a 7-year program to get an MD degree. Or if you had an A-level high school degree, you could enter into 6-year. And if you have some science background in an A-level, you can enter a 5-year pathway to get your MD degree. So there's various ways you can do that. I think, given what you said, you could enter a 6-year pathway into medical school for which you would be doing, if you will, not a post-bac, but you would actually be doing the pre-med year 2 and year 3. And depending on your aptitude, you might be able to just do your pre-med year 3 and go directly into the med school. And the difference in that is that a post-bac program gives you physics, chemistry, calculus, those sorts of things. Now, having said that, those are standard pre-med requisites. But the truth is, those are not particularly good classes to prepare you for medical school. They're just very hard science classes, and they're often used to find smart students to get into med school. The 3rd year of the pre-med program gives you more of an integrated curriculum. So you have some biochemistry, some genetics, some molecular biology, some micro, some physiology. And I think maybe a better preparation for a non-science major. Now, to show you that I believe that, I have a son that just graduated from Brown University, and he is a theater major. And he is thinking about going to med school. And I recommended for him that he go through the 3rd year of pre-med rather than the post-bac program and enter. So obviously I believe that might be a better pathway. And the reason for that is that that 3rd year of pre-med is taught by the faculty of the med school, and it's an integrated curriculum. Medical school is not taught anymore by disciplines like biochemistry, anatomy, etc. It's an integrated curriculum. You learn organ systems, and you learn about the heart, and you learn about the biochemistry and the molecular biology and the pharmacology and the microbiology of that. And so we teach, unlike college, we teach in an integrated way. And the 3rd year of pre-med is more of an integrated curriculum that transitions into med school. But those are all pathways that you could take to get into med school. You could take any one of those. Now
이거는 처음 알았어요, 오늘. 근데 그런 사례가 없었거든요. 배추럴스가 있는 분이 포스박을 치르고 그리고 들어가는 거였거든. 근데 지금 오늘 얘기를 하다 보니까 의예과 3학년에 들어와서 할 수 있는 방법을 얘기를 하시는데, 그게 저희 어드미션 쪽에 카운셀러끼리는 그게 없는 방법으로 알고 있었단 말이에요. 오늘 얘기를 하셨으니까 그 방법에 대해서는 이따 제가 디스커스해서 그 얘기를. 근데 포스박이 더 어렵다고 하니까 프리메드가 더 나을 것 같아요. 하여튼 그거는 나중에 저랑 또 얘기를 해볼게요.
I still have 1 or 2 questions.
Sure, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So,
I was also looking for one of the Hungarian med school. And I was just wondering, like, what's the advantage of enrolling and choosing St. George's?
over a Korean medical school?
For Hungarian. Hungary?
medical school in
Oh, a medical school in Hungary.
Yeah, because they're like much less tuition.
Oh,
fees.
sure, no question.
Yeah.
They're much cheaper.
Yeah, and I also heard that some of the students actually get to match
the residency programs in the United States. So
Yes, I'm sure one or two do.
yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about that, because that's, where do you want to practice medicine?
United States.
Okay, so that's what you should focus on. So a medical school in Hungary is a lot cheaper, okay? The first thing you should look at is how successful are they, what's their attrition rate, okay? How well do their students do in step 1, step 2 CK, and step 2 CS? You should need to know that. Because a school is judged by how well they prepare their students for the next step that they have in their career. So if it turns out that only half of the students that enter their med school actually end up with an MD degree, or less actually get passing grades in the step exams, then that's not good, because you have to pass all of those ACG and all those step 1, step 2 CK to actually have any chance of having a residency in the United States. The second problem with the Hungarian medical school is there's no rotations in the United States. So that's the big drawback. Now every year, if you look at the residency training in the United States, let's look at it statistically. 25% of all the residents in the United States are international graduates. So 75% of them are US grads. We'll just put them off to the side. Let's look at that 25%. Of that 25%, half of them are US citizens that went to schools like mine, and the other half are international graduates that went to 150 different medical schools. Now, what's the statistical likelihood that this school from Hungary can actually get you into a residency in the United States? Now, that school may not actually tell you their statistics. So I'll just say, generally speaking, the match rate for international students from a variety of international schools is about 30%. So the likelihood that you're going to get a residency, and I don't know if this Hungary school is a good school or not a good school, but as in a general rule, it's about 30%. I already told you that our likelihood of a international graduate getting a residency in the United States this year was 84%. So you're 3 times as likely to get a residency if you go to St. George's than you would going to a international school, generic international school, not knowing exactly the details of this Hungarian school. But I'll tell you that there's a lot of other international schools that have a much higher reputation than I don't actually know the name of the Hungarian school, so that's probably not a good sign, since I was in the other end of selecting residents, and I only knew less than a handful of international schools, their names, let alone whether I would take their residents. So the big advantage of the school is not that you're going to learn any more or less medicine, it's that you have a US-based experience in a hospital that has a residency training program, and you will get letters of recommendation from doctors that also train US doctors, and you'd be going to a school that has a very high record and a lot of graduates that have successfully made it through the program. So that's a huge advantage. Now, it's a lot more money, no doubt. Why is it a lot more money? Well, we actually share your tuition with the hospitals that train you. So, you're buying that quality of that education with your tuition dollars. So the Hungarian medical school, they're teaching you entirely in Hungary, and they're doing that for free probably. It is cheaper, but honestly, it's in my opinion, a much bigger gamble. So, it depends on how much you want to gamble. I actually think you sort of get what you pay for. So, if you really want to be a physician in the United States, I'd go to the place that gives you the highest likelihood of becoming a physician in the United States. And I think statistically, that's going to be us.
And graduating in one of the international med school, does it limit my choice on the residency programs? Because I really want to get into anesthesiology, but those are
anesthesiology?
Yeah, but those are very popular residency programs.
Okay, so here, let's be realistic. Your competitiveness for residency depends on you and the quality of your applicants. So, You know, sitting here, I could do much of what you just described with the Hungarian school. You know, we have had a graduate of St. George's University that has been a plastic surgeon, that has been a dermatologist, that has been a radiation oncologist. Those are three of the most competitive programs. Is it common? No, it's not common because it's really hard to get in those residencies. The vast majority of our graduates go into internal medicine and family medicine and pediatrics and pathology, and those are less competitive residencies, and those residencies take almost half of their residents as international graduates. So, you know, obviously most of them go into it. Is it possible to become a surgeon or an orthopod or something? Sure. It's just harder because it's a more competitive field. Now, anesthesiology, honestly, is not as competitive as EMT. Well, EMT is extremely competitive in the United States. It's one of the most competitive programs you can get into. So the odds that an international graduate is going to get a residency in ENT is extremely low. It's not zero, but it's probably less than 1%. The odds that an anesthesiologist who's an international graduate is probably about 40%. So it's not terrible, but it's not, you know. Could you become an anesthesiologist if you went to our school? Yes, if you did really well. If you don't do really well, no, then I think you probably will not end up as an anesthesiologist. But you could still end up as a practicing physician, but you might be in a different field. I mean, it is a competitive field. But I guess the good news, if you want to be an anesthesiologist, that's an in-between competitive field. It's not the most competitive, but it's not the least competitive.
Regarding
Sure.
that, how about the surgeon, especially like orthopedic surgeon?
Well, I think 8% of our graduates go into general surgery. So, you know, we obviously do a lot more placement in general surgery. I don't know, maybe 1, maybe 2% will go into orthopedics. Orthopedics is really competitive. You know, so it's not easy to get into orthopedic surgery in the United States as an international graduate. But we obviously place some of our students in there, but you got to be a really good student. Now, orthopedics is one of the fields that tends to screen their applicants based on your step scores. So, you know, if you end up with a, you know, step 1 or step 2 CK score of 205, you're not going to be an orthopedic surgeon. I can just tell you that. You wouldn't be an orthopedic surgeon if you went to Harvard. You will not become an orthopedic surgeon because they won't even look at your application unless you got probably a 230, 240. So, you know, those are really competitive fields. Now, does that make you a better orthopedic surgeon? No, you know, it doesn't make you a better orthopedic surgeon, but they are going to use that as one of the screening criteria to get into that program. Now, if you really wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon and you're an international graduate and you're in the United States, my recommendation is apply for some orthopedic surgery programs, but also apply for some general surgery programs. And so if you don't get into your orthopedic surgery, at least get into general surgery, and then go in train as a general surgeon. And when you complete your training as a general surgeon, you go back and apply to be an orthopedic surgeon. Now, I know in your generation you hate that because it takes a whole lot longer, but that's the pathway to become an orthopedic surgeon if that's what you really want to be, and you can't get into orthopedic surgery at your first attempt. You got to go in the long way, and that is to become a fully trained general surgeon and then turn around and apply to be an orthopedic surgeon.
How many percent is it for general surgeon?
I think it's 8%. 8% of our graduates go into general surgery. But those are generally our better students. I'll give you that. It's more competitive. General surgery is more competitive than family medicine. It is. But, you know, be a really good student. I mean, you know, it's difficult, you know, in this general advice. This is a competitive field. On the other hand, you don't want to go to a school where it's almost impossible. It's not impossible, but it is highly competitive. Orthopedic surgery is more competitive than anesthesia.
Is it possible to be a doctor for dermatology?
Dermatology?
Yeah.
Dermatology is, if not the most competitive, probably the second or third most competitive residency in the United States. So last year, I think 99% of the residents in dermatology in the United States were US grads. So it is really hard to be a dermatologist. Not impossible, but that is really hard. So, you know, I'm just trying to be honest with you. I don't think I'm doing you any favors telling you something that isn't true. If you want to be a dermatologist in the United States, that's really hard. That's going to be a really hard thing to do because everyone wants to be a dermatologist. They make a whole lot of money. They never work nights and weekends. You know, everybody wants to be a dermatologist, outpatient practice. You know, I understand that, but it's real competitive. Yeah.
In Korea, like other section doctors could be work as like I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to say in English, but
Other doctors with different training still can work as dermatologists without being board certified dermatologists. Is that what you're saying?
kind of in Korea
Yes, no, I am.
family doctor could be a
Right, I am aware that Korea has much looser rules about who can do what. I am aware of that, but that's not the rule in the United States. So you have to be increasingly, you not only have to be trained, but you have to be board certified. So insurance plans won't allow you to be paid for doing things unless you're certified to do those. And so the United States is pretty rigorously monitored. So no, a family physician can't really pretend to be a dermatologist. Say that isn't going to happen. Now they can do some dermatologic stuff, but they can't do Mohs. They can't do, they can't do, a lot of dermatology-related procedures. They can see patients with skin disorders, but in general, you got to be a board-certified dermatologist.
After I graduate to the SGU, is it possible to build their own hospital?
Clinic?
I'm not sure I
Yeah,
understand.
Own clinic. Not working for other hospital. Make my own clinic. Is it possible?
Well, when you graduate from our medical school, you generally will do a residency training, usually in the United States or England. Once you complete your residency training, you sit for the boards, so you become board certified. Once you become board certified, you can go and practice for yourself, you can build your own clinic, you can work for somebody else. That's up to you. There's no particular requirements that you do that. Now, I will tell you in the United States, there are very few doctors that practice on their own anymore. Nobody does this much in the United States. Now, I'm an old man. When I trained, a lot of doctors worked in private practice. That's very uncommon now in the United States. And it's because it's become too difficult for single doctors, one doctor, to practice. They have to develop this whole infrastructure of billing and collection and nurses and this sort of thing. So most of the doctors that are completing training join large groups. They don't really practice on their own anymore. It can be done. There's nothing stopping you. I just think that trend is really disappearing. And it's particularly disappearing fast because, as you may know now, over 50% of the medical students are women. And women have changed dramatically the work expectations in the medical field. So, there are a lot of women practicing medicine, but not full-time. And they're all in large groups. So that's a change. When I went to medical school, less than 5% of the doctors in training were women, and now it's 55%. So it's changed a lot in 40 years. For the better, by the way. I think it's good that we have a lot of women doctors, but that has changed things a lot.
석교 씨.
Hello, my name is Seokyo and I'm a high school student. Of course, for me and my parents, the financial problem is important, and I heard that it is difficult to get lots of scholarship. And so my question is simple: what kind of scholarship can I get, and how can I get as much as possible?
Well, that was probably the question everyone would ask. How much scholarship you get will be offered to you if you get accepted. So you apply to the med school, and they will tell you how much scholarship they will give you, and then you can decide to either take it or not take it. That's usually the easiest way to do it. Now, when you say how can you get the most, well, understand what types of scholarships we give and, qualify for those scholarships. So we have both need-based scholarships and we have merit-based scholarships. Obviously, if you can qualify for both of them, you'll get more money because you're qualifying for different scholarships. But I would also point out that even with scholarships, it's still a lot of money. There's no doubt it's a lot of money. So I think I would also look, since you're, let's say, in a high school, I assume you're in an A-level high school?
A-level?
A-level is, the degree of high school training changes.
GPA?
No, it's not a GPA. It's if you have an, in the English system, if you have an A-level high school education, you actually have the equivalent in the United States of a year of community college, etc. It's a farther than. Well, let's say if you had an international high school diploma, different than a regular high school diploma. It depends. In other words, I can't give you an answer based on just saying you're a high school student. They have to look at your school and understand your diploma to understand at what point you would enter our educational system. You could enter at 7 years, you could enter at 6 years, you could enter at 5 years. It'd be one of those. I don't know which one it is. But it depends on how much training you've had at the high school level. Now that's important because an extra year of training is a lot more money. So obviously it's cheaper if you can enter a 5-year program than if you enter a 6-year program or a 7-year program because you're paying more tuition and you're paying for room and board. So you have to have a place to stay, etc. So the amount of money is a lot of money, but I would say if your option is going to the United States for 4 years of college and then applying to med school, it is a lot cheaper to go on a 6 or 5-year program with us than to go to 4 years of college, because 4 years of college as an international graduate, I think even at a state university is still going to cost you $250,000, so it's still a lot of money. But that's how you would do it. You apply to the med school, and then after you apply, you get accepted. And then if you get accepted, you apply for financial aid, and then they'll tell you how much financial aid you'll get. And then based on that, you'll make a decision whether you want to do it or not. That's how it works. And then ask the people, about your scholarship program. There'll be a financial aid counselor that will tell you all of the various sources of financial aid and apply for them. But at the end of the day, we'll tell you exactly how much scholarship you'll get, so you'll know. It's not a mystery, they'll tell you.
자빈 씨 왔어요? 어제 7분만 초대하려고 했는데 저기 12분 저기 초대하니까 다 오셨어요. 그중에 한 50%만 오시더라고요. 자빈 씨 마지막입니다.
Hi, I'm Javin. I majored by manufacturing in Korea, and I know time is ticking, but I'm interested in veterinary school.
Oh, we have a great veterinary school.
Yeah. So can you explain the curriculum of veterinary school? And
Sure.
do you also have scholarship in vet school?
Yes, we do. So the veterinary school, we actually have a U.S. accredited veterinary school. Now to explain, you'd say, well, why don't we have a U.S. accredited med school? The U.S. accreditation system for medical schools only accredits schools in the United States and Canada. They will not accredit outside the United States. So we have a LC&E equivalent accreditation, at least according to the U.S. government. So we have accreditation alternatively. But the veterinary school will accredit veterinary schools outside the United States, and we're one of only 2 veterinary schools outside the United States to be accredited by the U.S. veterinary accreditation, so obviously a very high quality school. Now, the veterinary school there are several ways to enter the veterinary school, just like there's several areas to enter the med school. Most of the students do 4 years of college, get a bachelor's degree, and then they enter a 4-year veterinary education. But we also have 7-year, 6-year, and 5-year programs in the veterinary school as well, depending on how you enter. Now, the curriculum in those 4 years of veterinary school is that it's 3 years on the island of Grenada, and then in the 4th year, we have affiliation agreements with 26 veterinary schools in the United States, England, Australia, Ireland, etc., where the students will spend their 4th year of veterinary school there. So for instance, we have affiliations with what I would say are probably the top veterinary schools in the world. So you could come to us for 3 years and then go to Cornell or Ohio State or Texas A&M. Those are 3 of the best veterinary schools in the world. And you can, so our pattern's a little different. We go to Grenada for 3 years, and then you, in the 4th year, most of them go to the United States and they spend the 4th year at one of at least 20 US veterinary schools for their last year. We have a similar high pass rate on the standardized test that all veterinarians take in order to get a license to practice in the United States. So we have an equally impressive veterinary school record. The attrition rate in veterinary school is also about the same as it is in med school, so we have a low attrition rate. So there are many of the things I said about a med school are equally true about the veterinary schools. A couple things that are different about the veterinary school. It's mostly female veterinary students, so 80% of our students. In medical school it's about 50-50, but in veterinary school 80% are women and 20% are men. That's just the nature of the field, so it will be mostly female students. And many of them will also go on and do internships in the United States. The cost of our tuition is lower in veterinary school. In fact, our veterinary tuition is at about the 40th percentile of out-of-state tuitions in the United States, where our medical school tuition is closer to the top end of private medical schools in the United States. So actually the veterinary school is kind of a bargain in that it's considerably less expensive for the amount of education you get than probably the med school. And I don't know what else to say about it. We're in the process of getting it UK accredited too. If we're successful, we already had our site visit, we'll be the only veterinary school in the world that's both UK accredited and US accredited. And I really like the students, by the way. I really love the vet students. They're great.